Hi, this is Molly and welcome back to my channel. We're going to take a look here at the USA's chart. This is part 3 in my series about the USA's astrological energies in the upcoming American Revolution, and we're going to look more specifically at Neptune. We're going to look at how transiting Neptune is working with natal Neptune in the USA chart and the themes that have emerged over the years that show us that we learn through history what happens with these transiting Neptune cycles. So Neptune is all about our ideals, and in a country's chart, it's the country's ideals, what the hopes are, the dreams, how are we going to be the best we can be. Neptune relates to the world of entertainment, Hollywood, glamour, things that are idealized. Neptune relates to spiritual growth, stepping outside the physical and learning from the higher energies. Neptune relates to health issues, healing, energy transmutation. It's a lot of spiritual energy, the spiritual will of a country. Neptune relates to any types of marginalized populations or underrepresented populations, such as misfits, orphans, prisoners, anyone who is outside of normal society. Neptune relates to the ocean, flooding, water rising, global weather changes, bigger energy cycles that are deeply impact our lives. So the transiting Neptune energies also shows us where there are cycles that are ending, removals, release, what is complete. And we're going to see this here as I guide you through some of these energies that the United States has experienced. So important to note that this is based on the 1776 energy of the Declaration of Independence, which of course is when the United States declared independence from England. It's associated with the Boston Tea Party and other times in history. Now I'm going to go through these dates pretty quickly, and some of you might be historians and you might know a lot more than me, but I'm just trying to paint some general understandings of these themes. So the energy of Neptune in Virgo, Virgo pertains to the skills and trade of the economy, what the people can do, what they bring to the workforce. It's about agriculture. It's about how these are all energies that are shared internationally in the 9th house. It's how we aspire to grow or develop these parts of the economy. With Virgo being very practical, realistic, the processes, the how-tos. And in fact, Neptune is actually quite uncomfortable in Virgo. And so there's this sense of, this is what we want, and this is the reality of what is really possible. So during the time that the country was born, so to speak, Neptune in Virgo was down to earth, realistic, and practical. So what happens then is transiting Neptune moves on. And transiting Neptune moves to make its first opening square in 1816. There are actually 2 Neptune cycles that I'm going to be referencing. First, we're going to look at the green, what's in green, and then we're going to look at what's in pink. But this is to help you see the overlapping themes and the times that have changed and how the country has shifted between these different cycles. So when transiting Neptune was at 22 degrees of Sagittarius, there was a square to natal Neptune at 22 degrees of Virgo. And this is called an opening square, the first square that squares the energy. And it's a challenge. It's a transition. It shows us what's working, what's not working. And at this time, 1816 to 1817, it's about how the U.S. was growing with new states, how ideals are shifting with that growth. There was also in 1815 the ending of the War of 1812, which was between the U.S. and the U.K., which then opened up free trade and the American banking system. So we always have these significant shifts here when the outer planets, the transiting outer planets, square their natal location. So we had the ending of a war around economic goods. And this is how the U.S. started to become more independent. and opened up its own free trade. So you can look into that more, of course. The other thing that happened around the same time frame, it was actually in 1819. It was called the Panic of 1819, which was a time when the U.S. was shifting to an independent economy, standing on its own, and this, of course, affected the global relationships that the U.S. was about to step into. And in 1819, it's still within this transit of Neptune because of how Neptune moves so slowly. So there was essentially an economic panic, which affects these Virgo energies of trade, skills, and how the U.S. is able to be its own. The first house is house to be in its own identity, to be its own entity. And in fact, one of the energies of Neptune is confusion. And something that I found quite interesting was how these Neptune transits, the opposition and the squares, all resulted in some type of mass confusion or panic. So that's an interesting theme to take note of. So after we had that opening square in 1816 to 1817 is when it was exact. Then we had, a number of years later, the first opposition. And this is really important to note because this is when transiting Neptune was at 22 degrees of Pisces, opposing the natal Neptune, right, at 22 degrees of Virgo. And this is what we're going to be experiencing again, 2021 to 2022. So this energy is very important to understand because these are the same themes that are going to be coming up as Neptune returns to 22 degrees of Pisces. Okay, sorry, I'm just shifting this here. So in 1857 to 1859, there were very big issues in the United States of America, and the most prominent one was slavery. And the divide between the North and the South, and how the Civil War would eventually break out in the following decade. So a very big time of a split, an energetic split, an ideal split. It really was a time of not being clear on what was best for the country, different ideals. And the other big issue around this time was the Panic of 1857, and that related to the declining international economy and the effects on the domestic economy of the U.S., and it was known as one of the first worldwide economic crises. This is when the New York banks closed for a number of months. The banks were closed. So again, with this Neptune transit, a panic, mass confusion, uncertainty around money keeps coming up, the economic impacts that this transiting Neptune is associated with. So then let's move on here to the next square of transiting Neptune. This was when Neptune was at 22 degrees of Gemini, 1898 to 99, the end of the century. You'll notice that at this time, this is when transiting Neptune was also conjunct that Mars at 21 degrees of Gemini. So this is also when there were more states coming into the United States. The first issue of the Wall Street Journal is published. And that's fascinating considering that Gemini is about communications and the news and what is communicated and shared with people. In 1898, we also had the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Spanish-American War. And this is when the U.S. won essentially temporary control of Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico. So there were big issues around diplomacy and taking action, Mars, and how that affected the U.S. in the world and established some dominance, yes, but also what was lost even when there were achievements and winning. The other themes that come up here around 1898 to 1990 was that until 1897, there was another panic. It was called the Panic of 1893 to 1897. So we're getting a clear theme here of the economic impact that this transiting Neptune brings up when it makes a square or an opposition to the natal Neptune, creates this sense of what's real in the economy, what's real in information that's being shared and put out there, and what's real that we can count on. I feel like this transiting Neptune is really something that has shown us a refinement of the country's reality, of the job market, and what is needed to sustain the country. So it's quite fascinating. So let's move on here to when the U.S. experienced transiting Neptune conjunct natal Neptune. So that's when transiting Neptune was back at 22 degrees of Virgo from 1938 to 1940. And I know that many of you would know what this would reference. It is the time when World War II begins. And Virgo is actually about soldiers, those who serve, those who show up. Also during this time, uranium was discovered. The world of nuclear physics began. FDR was president. Regular television begins broadcasting in the U.S. Remember, again, Neptune is about entertainment. Some big Hollywood films at the time would have been The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. Hollywood's impact was certainly important, and perhaps even the escapism was big during the tumultuous times of Hitler and World War II beginning. There was also the Neutrality Act of 1939, which was an extension of the Neutrality Act from 1937, which was a cash and carry provision that allowed countries at war to purchase items from the United States as long as they transported them on non-U.S. ships, paid in cash, and were approved by the president. So this is basically a regulation of goods, and that would have certainly been in the domain of Virgo as well. So this was a really big time when there was this conjunction of natal Neptune and transiting Neptune. And again, the ideals of the country and the losses. Neptune always brings losses and removals. Also important to note that the Great Recession was right before this exact period, and the Great Recession being associated with Neptune as well. So then transiting Neptune moves on, and we then get to kind of a more recent era here in the 1980s. 1980 to 1981, we again saw transiting Neptune at 22 degrees of Sagittarius squaring natal Neptune. Remember that square, this is an opening square, which means it's always about checking in with what began here. What is working? What is not working? What's changing? What's shifting? What needs to go? Well, of course, in 1980 began Reagan years, Reagan economics, Reagan's foreign policy. Sagittarius, foreign policy, and the USSR and the Cold War, and a lot going on in the world that really shaped the US's identity, first house. And the first house is subjective, so it's very much about this is what matters to us. In 1982, well, actually, I believe it was 1979 to 82, there was also the recession, which is why Reagan economics were so big and so pivotal to the country and what the country was going through. The U.S. was growing in the Sun Belt states at this time. Sagittarius is also about growth. So that would be Florida, Georgia, the South. And there was also this interest, there was a perception of American decline in the international affairs. And again, remember, Neptune is about losses and the declines that show up. So there can be big declines, big removals in perceptions, belief systems, what is shifting, what is changing. So again, this is the time when we had this last Neptune squaring natal Neptune in the US chart. So then that brings us to this upcoming time in 2021 and 2023, when transiting Neptune will get to 22 degrees of Pisces again. And as you remember, this is when there was the really heavy issues around slavery and a split in the country. And what are we about as a country? What is this all about? What are we doing? Where are we on the same page? And where are we not? And so this Neptune in Pisces is showing a split in consciousness, a split in ideals of priorities. And this is an ending energy, especially Neptune in Pisces, which is the completion of a cycle. 22 degrees, it's in the third decan. It's an ending at a very big level, big shifts, big changes, big losses. So if you wanted to study some more of these themes, like if you're in economics or if you're interested in kind of more of the cycles that are happening, this is the time frame to reference, 1857 to 1859, because it's the same time when Neptune was last here. Of course, the country is very different now, and yet still the same, right? There's a growth opportunity by releasing and ending. There are these energies of mass confusion, of uncertainty. There could certainly be another panic with economics, with the banks. I mean, I don't want to say that will definitely happen, because hopefully we are wiser in some regards. The economy is different. The U.S. is certainly more connected with all the international markets. But this is a time of assessing what began in the last conjunction of 1938 to 1940. So essentially, since World War II, what has the United States learned, developed, and what needs to be let go of? What needs to end that started in the late 1930s? And this could, of course, be energies, ideals, a way of life, a consciousness, an understanding of what the world looks like now. There's reality checks here. And there's a sense of a turning point. Every opposition is a turning point. And so when transiting Neptune is opposing its natal location, it's understanding that, okay, there's something that needs to be released in order to go forward. So we there's big endings here. And again, this can show up in so many ways, and maybe for some people the writing's on the wall, and everyone kind of comes to the table with their own perceptions and understanding based on the information that you've accumulated, based on the information that you have. But one thing we do know is that Neptune themes revolve around what is outside of us, what is real and what is not real. I would suspect that there will be global weather changes with the ocean. Neptune in Pisces is the ocean, but also water. And you look at how there's been a lot of flooding in the Midwest. It's looking at what's best for us spiritually as a country to grow, that could be outside of what the Virgo energies perceive. There are the health and healing issues, and how we care for ourselves, care for our body, care for what we need during these big times of changing and shifting. There's also a sense of releasing what is complete so that a new dream, a new ideal, something new can take shape and take form, So understand that this is a big time for the U.S. between these dates, although we're certainly feeling it into 2020. And this could even be a big research project if you wanted to dive in even more. And I did only reference the squares and oppositions because those are the times of the most challenges, when growth happens, when important decisions and new directions are made. There are the times when there is the trines, when transiting Neptune trines natal Neptune, and that's usually a supportive energy. But in this video, I focused on the oppositions and squares because we're entering the time of an opposition. And so that's the energy that is most important. So again, to reiterate some of the main themes, these Neptune transits typically coincide with recession, economic issues, removal, demise. They coincide with something not being clear, mass confusion, a sense of we don't know what's happening, what's real. It coincides with a split in consciousness, a split in ideals, a split in what is best for the country at hand. In my next video, in part 4, I'm going to examine Pluto. We're going to take a look at the energies of transiting Pluto because of the upcoming conjunction to transiting Pluto, reaching 27 degrees of Capricorn for the first time since 1776. So I will talk about that in my next video in part 4. And remember, this energy is coinciding with this Neptune energy. So it's certainly a very big time. It's very serious. It's a very serious time. And the best thing we can do is be prepared, be on a higher understanding of what is happening, and to be aware that you always have your choices to make as the world changes. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want to learn astrology with me, you can find out more about my current classes and offerings below this video. Otherwise, I'll be back shortly with part 4 of this series of videos. Thank you so much.